Greetings, programs. Welcome to Rationality, From AI to Zombies, Chapter 42, Making History Available. There is a habit of thought, which I call the logical fallacy of generalization from fictional evidence. Journalists, who, for example, talk about the Terminator movies in a report on AI, do not usually treat Terminator as a prophecy or fixed truth. But the movie is recalled, is available, as if it were an illustrative, historical case, as if the journalist had seen it happen on some other planet, so it might well happen here. More on this in Section 7 of Cognitive Biases Potentially Affecting Judgment of Global Risks. There is an inverse error to generalizing from fictional evidence, failing to be sufficiently moved by historical evidence. The trouble of generalizing from fictional evidence is that it is fiction. It never actually happened. It's not drawn from the same distribution as our real universe. Fiction differs from reality in systematic ways. But history has happened, and should be available. In our ancestral environment, there were no movies. What you saw with your own eyes was true. Is it any wonder that fictions we see in lifelike moving pictures have too great an impact on us? Conversely, things that really happened, we encounter as ink on paper. They happened, but we never saw them happen. We don't remember them happening to us. The inverse error is to treat history as a mere story. Process it with the same part of your mind that handles the novels you read. You may say with your lips that it is truth rather than fiction, but that doesn't mean you are being moved as much as you should be. Many biases involve being insufficiently moved by dry, abstract information. Once upon a time, I gave a mysterious answer to a mysterious question, not realizing that I was making exactly the same mistake as astrologers devising mystical explanations for the stars, or alchemists devising magical properties of matter, or vitalists postulating an opaque élan vital to explain all of biology. When I finally realized whose shoes I was standing in, there was a sudden shock of unexpected connection with the past. I realized that the invention and destruction of vitalism, which I had only read about in books, had actually happened to real people, who experienced it much the same way I experienced the invention and destruction of my own mysterious answer. And I also realized that if I had actually experienced the past, if I had lived through past scientific revolutions myself, rather than reading about them in history books, I would probably not have made the same mistake again. I would not have come up with another mysterious answer. The first 1,000 lessons would have hammered home the moral. So I thought, to feel sufficiently the force of history, I should try to approximate the thoughts of an Eliezer who had lived through history. I should try to think as if everything I read about in history books had actually happened to me, with appropriate reweighting for the availability bias of history books. I should remember being 1,000 peasants for every ruler. I should immerse myself in history. Imagine living through eras I only saw as ink on paper. Why should I remember the Wright brothers' first flight? I was not there. But a rationalist, I could not dare to not remember when the event actually happened. Is there so much difference between seeing an event through your eyes, which is actually a causal chain involving reflected photons, not a direct connection, and seeing an event through a history book? Photons and history books both descend by causal chains from the event itself. I had to overcome the false amnesia of being born at a particular time. I had to recall, to make available, all the memories, not just the memories which, by mere coincidence, belonged to myself and my own era. The Earth became older all of a sudden. To my former memory, the United States had always existed. There was never a time when there was no United States. I had not remembered, until that time, how the Roman Empire rose, had brought peace and order, and lasted through so many centuries, until I forgot all the things that had ever been otherwise. And yet the empire fell. Barbarians overran my city, and the learning that I'd possessed was lost. The modern world became more fragile to my eyes. It was not the first modern world. So many mistakes, made over and over and over again, because I did not remember making them in every era I had never lived. And to think, people sometimes wonder if overcoming bias is important. Don't you remember how many times your biases have killed you? You don't? I've noticed that sudden amnesia often follows a fatal mistake. But take it from me, it happened. I remember. I wasn't there. So next time you doubt the strangeness of the future, remember how you were born in a hunter-gatherer tribe 10,000 years ago, when no one knew of science at all. Remember how you were shocked to the depths of your being when science explained the great and terrible sacred mysteries that you once revered so rightly. Remember how you once believed you could fly by eating the right mushrooms, and then you accepted with disappointment that you would never fly. And then you flew. Remember how you had always thought that slavery was right and proper, and then you changed your mind. Don't imagine how you could have predicted the change, for that is amnesia. Remember that, in fact, you did not guess. Remember how, century after century, the world changed in ways you did not guess. Perhaps then you will be less shocked by what happens next. Here ends chapter 42. Now for my thoughts. Right, so in other environments, I have been looking into economics and history and why certain things keep happening. And this is a good explanation. Why do people keep making the same kind of stupid economic mistakes over and over again? Well, in short, it's because they didn't live through the previous history of those mistakes, the hard learnings that people had. Sure, the people lived through the terrible times caused by whatever economic policy or problem. They learnt the lesson, and they will never repeat those mistakes. They learnt the hard way, had it shoved in their face. This is what happens if you do the silly thing. But those people die. And the people that come afterwards didn't live through those things. They didn't learn the harsh lesson. All they have are words on a page. And as important as those words on a page may be, as much as we can learn from them, that is nowhere near the same to a human brain, to the human animal as a whole, as actually living through it. Being told that, hundreds of thousands or even millions of people are dying in unnecessary wars overseas, it's like, sure, most of us are aware of that, and it's sad, and if we were given a magic wand, we might fix it. But for the most part, it takes somebody who's actually been there and seen it with their own eyes to really get the fire in their belly to go, this has to stop no matter what. There is a reason the greatest proponents of people fighting things like climate change, people fighting for things like ending wars and whatever, are the ones that have been there and seen it. Other people have just been told about it. And even a really good article online or in a newspaper or whatever, even a brilliantly well-written one with some photos, it's not the same. It doesn't have the same impact. And weirdly, movies kind of do. But there's a problem. Most people go to movies to be entertained. And no one's going to make a Terminator-style, big-budget, cool, well-produced, brilliantly acted and directed movie about something terrible and get the money to do it. And then people are going to want to go see it. It's like, oh yeah, that movie, it's really good, very historical, really well detailed, but it's really depressing. So, they're going to tell their friends, and the friends are not going to want to go. Would you? Now, you might be one of the rare people who will actually go to learn something important. But chances are good, if you are that kind of person, you've already done that sort of thing online. And this is kind of a problem, because in the modern world, people who can think ahead like that, people who can fight their biases, people who even know they have biases, and chances are, if you think you don't have biases, you probably have more biases than average, you just think you're clever. But people who think like that, they're rare. Yeah, if you're listening to this and thinking, well, hang on, I know some rationality stuff, I've done critical thinking, I've been taught at university or school or whatever how to think critically, and I practice that. Good. That's good. You should. But that's rare. You're a rare person already. And you also have problems. Even the likes of Eliezer, who isn't perfect, but is further along the way to rationality than the rest of us. He's even rarer still. And he wrote a book about it. Which means it's up to the rest of us to encourage people to learn critical thinking skills, to encourage educational institutions to include critical thinking skills as part of their core curriculum, teaching kids how to think rather than what to think. And that's also a problem because, as any teacher will tell you, there are bright students in the class who just need to be unleashed and will actually figure things out on their own and so forth. And that's great, and these are the star students that every teacher loves. But there are also the kids who just don't care. And I'm not just talking about kids who have a terrible home life or who have nutritional issues that cause problems or psychological issues that cause problems. I'm just talking about perfectly ordinary kids with perfectly ordinary home lives who happen not to be the self-motivated, self-driving kind of kid. And they need to basically have things pounded into them. Sad as though that may be. Those amazing, clever, self-motivated kinds of kids, they're rare. But we can improve things by changing the odds a little bit so that people who are not in that rare category are taught critical thinking skills, which they can then use, which then leads on to things like rationality, understanding your biases. After all, you can't really think critically if you're not aware of the fact that you have a bias to, for example, the very first thing you see. And the problem is, the advertising people, the propaganda people, the same thing really, they know these things. They know how to construct ads that influence you, even though you think, that's just a silly ad. But the idea, the politics espoused, the product sold, it sticks in your head. And later on, when you're thinking about a thing, it just pops up. Just like the Terminator thing. So when you start talking about AI, you can be pretty confident that somebody's going to have the image of the Terminator just popping into their heads. I know I do. Right, that's all for this episode. Tune in next time for episode 43. Explain, Worship, Ignore. Bye for now.